A bombshell name drop during testimony in the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. Why were singers Usher and Ne-Yo brought up in the courtroom? We're diving into the connection these A-listers and music legends have to the now disgraced music mogul, and what the night in question that a witness claims they were in attendance for means to how this trial could play.
What's resurfacing now doesn't come back like a headline. It comes back like a cold memory you never fully forgot. The kind that sits quietly for years, then suddenly makes sense when someone finally puts words to it.
Names in Hollywood and the music industry, that's not breaking news, but it was a bit of a surprise this week when Usher and Ne-Yo's names came up during testimony. The witness that brought up Ne-Yo and Usher was Dawn Richard. She was once a member of the singing group Danity Kane. That group was signed to Diddy's label, Bad Boy Records, and she also sang for another bad boy group called Diddy Dirty Money. Sean Combs was actually part of that group. It was a trio. They had a few songs that came out between 2009 and 2011. Prosecutors called Richard to testify. Now, before I get into the moment where Usher and Ne-Yo were brought up, I want to take you through her testimony and what led to the point that she brought their names into this. Now, Richard told prosecutors in 2009 she witnessed Sean Combs allegedly attack his then girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, the singer known as Cassie, who has already testified in this trial that she was abused by Combs physically and sexually during their 10-year relationship that ended in 2018. Now here's a line in the transcript where Richard said, quote, "I observed Cassie being attacked," and then when asked who attacked Cassie, she answered, quote, "She was attacked by Sean Combs." In the incident in 2009 that Richard talked about, she said she was recording music at Combs' LA home. Cassie was making eggs, and then Combs comes downstairs, quote, angry, and was saying where the expletive was his eggs. Excuse my language. And he was telling Cassie that she never gets anything right, where the expletive is his food. And he proceeded to come over to her, took the skillet with the eggs in it, and then tried to hit her over the head with it, and she fell to the ground. Richard told prosecutors that she witnessed Diddy allegedly attack Cassie multiple times, physically beating her. And while she was a member of Diddy Dirty Money between 2009 and 2011, she said it was frequent that she would see these things. She said that Combs would, quote, punch her, choke her, drag her, slap her in the mouth. I saw him kick her, punch her in the stomach. Now, when it comes to Usher and Ne-Yo, their names are brought up related to an incident in 2010 that happened at a restaurant in California. Dawn Richard was asked about this incident both by the prosecution and defense, but it's interesting how her answers and the details she gives are different depending on the questions that are asked. Richard was asked about that incident. It was in West Hollywood, California. There was a restaurant, a dinner with a lot of powerful people in 2010. And at that dinner, Richard says Diddy allegedly punched Cassie in the stomach. She said, quote, "We were having a private conversation, and when we're all sitting, eating at the tables together, when I say we, I mean some bad boys, some of our other label, and some celebrities were in the room, and they were secretly arguing, and he punched her in the stomach. Sean Combs punched her in the stomach." The prosecution then asks, quote, "Who, if any of Mr. Combs' employees were present?" And Richard says Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, D-Rock, Bonds, myself, and Kalina Harper. Now the prosecution...
Not accusations, not drama, just recollection, calm, measured, and somehow more disturbing because of that. For a long time, the past was sealed behind success, money, influence, legacy, all of it worked like a wall. Anything uncomfortable bounced off that wall and disappeared, or at least that's what people believed. But time has a way of weakening even the strongest structures, especially when silence starts to crack. The stories being shared now aren't about spectacle, they're about atmosphere, about how certain spaces felt, about the energy in rooms where everything looked perfect but never felt safe, where opportunity came bundled with unease, where fear didn't announce itself, it lingered. These aren't stories told with anger. They're told with clarity that only distance provides. Distance from power, distance from dependence, distance from the fear of losing everything for saying the wrong thing. Back then, the environment trained people to normalize discomfort, to accept strange situations as part of the process, to assume that feeling unsettled was a personal weakness instead of a...
The prosecution didn't really follow that line in their questioning. They did ask about bad boy employees who were present at the restaurant, to which Richard named people like Combs, the bodyguard D-Rock, Pierre the executive. But then the defense had their chance at cross-examination, and through their questioning is when we saw those big names drop. The defense asked Richard, please tell me who was all at this restaurant. Richard answers, Harv Pierre, Capricorn Clark, Mia, and myself, Kalina, our bodyguards, which was Bonds, and D-Rock, Cassie. The question continues with the defense asking, you remember who was all there, right? And Richard says, mm-hmm. The defense asks, do you recall alleging several celebrities were actually there? And Richard says yes. And the defense then says, quote, so when the government asked you who was all there, and I asked you who was all there right now, you didn't mention any of the celebrities, right? Right, Richard says. The defense then asks Richard to name the celebrities. And then she says, quote, Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. There were a few others too. I don't recall those people, but those are the ones I remember talking to. The defense then pressed Richard a bit, asking why she didn't say those names before when she was asked about who was there by the defense. And Richard says she was just repeating what she told the government in their direct examination. Usher and Diddy go back decades. Usher lived with Combs for a year, actually, when he was just a rising star in the music industry. He was 13, 14 years old at the time. Usher actually spoke about living with Combs in an interview 8 years ago on the Howard Stern show. Here's part of what he said.
You're going to go to Puff Daddy's. He's going
in the 90s. Do you understand what that's like?
Puffy's place was like just filled with chicks and orgying like nonstop, right?
No, not really. I mean, but hey, it was curious. I got a chance to see some things.
Now, as far as Grammy winner Neo, he is someone who has been known to be a friend of Diddy and to be in the same social circles over the years. He faced backlash for a comment he made in the wake of Diddy's arrest during a performance in New Zealand last year, where he reportedly said, quote, on stage, I was sexually assaulted and I liked it. I had a great time and I'd do it again. He later apologized for that and said, quote, in an attempt to be playful with my fans, I made an insensitive and irresponsible joke while on tour, and I'd like to truly apologize from the bottom of my heart. This is according to the UK media outlet, The Metro. Now, the other name that Richard mentioned was Jimmy Levine. He is a music legend. He is known as the co-founder of Interscope Records, so an incredibly powerful person in the music industry. It's important to note that in her testimony, Richard did not specifically say that any of the three actually witnessed that alleged moment where Combs punched Ventura in the stomach, but she did say that they were allegedly there that night. Now, none of the three have released statements since their names were brought up in court. Combs is on trial. He's expected to be on trial for roughly 7 more weeks. He's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking by force, and transportation to engage in prosecution. He has pleaded not guilty. Joining us now once again to talk about this case is former prosecutor and criminal defense attorney Safa Robinson-Ferrer. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Usher's name, he comes up yesterday, and that was kind of a moment where people clearly recognize who Don Richard was talking about. What should we take away from that anecdote and the fact that Usher's name was brought up?
The fact that Usher's name was brought up, I think one of two things about it. On one hand, it's irrelevant. It doesn't go to prove or disprove whether Mr. Combs is guilty of the charges as alleged in
warning sign. That's how control works best. When it convinces you to doubt yourself before you ever doubt it. Nothing had to be explicit. Nothing had to be written down. Expectations were understood without being spoken. The pressure was invisible but constant. You could feel it in how people moved, how they spoke, how they avoided certain topics. There's something chilling about realizing that what you once brushed off as just weird was actually something deeper, something darker, not because of a single moment, but because of repetition, because of how often the same unease returned. When someone finally describes that feeling out loud, it changes how the past looks. Suddenly moments that were dismissed as awkward take on new weight. Suddenly the silence around them feels intentional instead of coincidental. The resurfacing isn't dramatic, it's quiet. That's what makes it unsettling. There's no shouting, no theatrics, just a calm acknowledgement that certain experiences were frightening, confusing, and never fully understood at the time. Fear doesn't always come from
the indictment. On the other hand, I do think that it provides background information that there were other individuals that could have possibly observed these alleged assaults or attacks on Ms. Ventura. Not only that, but if the government intends on establishing a timeline or a pattern of events with respect to Mr. Combs, his enterprise, and their dealings with individuals from the public or in the industry, it's good to note that the allegation, or at least the testimony came in, that Usher was involved with Mr. Combs early on in his career when he was approximately, I believe, 14 years of age, that he had gone to some sort of academy through Mr. Combs' enterprise or business. And the government can certainly use that to show a long pattern of behavior, dealings that he may have had with other individuals in the industry, and also to establish that Mr. Combs and Ms. Ventura had this long-standing relationship, that not only, there were a select few that got to observe, but that publicly some of these allegations or allegations of violence happened, and that other people observed those things.
And when we look at the transcript, and I have it here, and you have the defense asking why Richard did not talk previously in conversations with the government about Usher being there, Jimmy Levine, who's a famous producer, as well as the singer Neo. Should we take anything away from that it appeared that their names didn't come up earlier when she was having conversations with the government?
Yeah, what we can take away, and what the defense is essentially trying to do here, is really strike at her credibility. What the defense did during its cross-examination is say, well, these other individuals were there and you didn't disclose their names until now. And why was that? If you are participating in a government investigation, you're presumed and you should tell the truth, the whole truth, and the full truth. And you failed to disclose a significant thing, which were the other individuals that were present. You failed to disclose that to the government. And now it's only today, as you're testifying, that we're just now hearing of these other individuals, Usher Raymond, Neo, and other executive producers that were involved or possibly witnesses to the case. Again, striking at her credibility because she did not tell the full truth at the time she was asked by the government, which later down the line during closing arguments, the defense can get up and say, Ms. Richard testified A, B, and C to you. However, she failed to disclose X, Y, and Z, and that's why you shouldn't believe her. That's why you should not give her the credibility that the judge is going to instruct you on, and the jury can take that into consideration.
And one thing that's been apparent throughout all the witnesses thus far is clearly this was a relationship that had a lot of domestic violence incidents, but this isn't a domestic violence case. Yet it seems like there's a lot of people who witnessed physical abuse. And in this case, you have Usher and Neo. I mean, these are A-list celebrities who are seeing Sean Combs punch his girlfriend allegedly in the stomach, which is something that you would think if you saw that, on the outside, if you think you'd stop that, you would step in, you would say something, but apparently they didn't, according to Don Richard's testimony. Does any of that, the fact that he was doing this out in the open, play towards taking some of the domestic violence incidents, but showing that it was a much larger thing, which is what the government's trying to prove?
So with respect to the other individuals being present, although there's an allegation that they were present, and they're not really allegations, it's just background facts, I don't know that Ms. Richard has testified that they actually observed
violence. Sometimes it comes from imbalance, from knowing someone holds your future in their hands, from knowing that resistance might not be punished immediately, but it will be remembered. The past being discussed now is filled with those kinds of moments where something felt off, but speaking up felt impossible, moments where intuition said leave, but ambition said stay, moments where survival meant compliance. People often ask why these stories weren't shared sooner. The answer is embedded in the stories themselves. You don't challenge power while you're dependent on it. You don't risk everything when you don't yet understand what you're risking it for. At the time, it felt easier to convince yourself it was normal, that everyone went through it, that this was just how things worked at that level. That discomfort was the price of entry. Only later, with maturity and perspective, does the truth settle in, that no amount of success should require fear, that no opportunity should come with a constant knot in your stomach, that no environment should make you feel small on purpose. What's resurfacing now forces people to re-examine what they once admired, to separate image from
the striking. Maybe they did, maybe they did not. But I don't think that that's going to do any benefit for the government as far as knowing that these things happened more broadly. I mean, it's clear as day that this case is rooted in domestic violence, that Mr. Combs was domestically violent towards Ms. Ventura, whether it was isolated behind closed doors and just Ms. Ventura, and a close select few were testifying to this, or on a grander scale where, a select few and publicly people can testify or people have observed these allegations, whether it was just one or whether it was many. Testimony is evidence, and whether that was testimony from one person or testimony from multiple people, the jury can still consider that as evidence in determining whether Mr. Combs is guilty or not guilty. If these individuals observe that, then the hope would be that someone would have intervened earlier on. But again, it doesn't negate the fact that, the charges here are racketeering, sex trafficking, and things of that nature. One of the things the government is alleging is the use of force. So I think that's why we continue to hear this domestically violent line of questioning. And I think the government is hoping that the jurors will view this as satisfactory to the element requiring requiring force, physical force of violence.
Yeah, and to your point, I'll just looking at this transcript, you're right. Yeah, it's Usher was there, Jimmy Levine was there, Neo came through. So it's saying that they were there, not necessarily that they witnessed the abuse that Dawn Richard said happened at this dinner. What did you make of her testimony now that she's off the stand?
It was pretty interesting testimony. I don't know that she was a necessary witness, although the government deemed her to be necessary. Ms. Ventura got on the stand and testified about the abuse, testified about what happened to her. Ms. Richard seemingly came up behind her and corroborated for the government those allegations. And I don't think there was even a question about that. The hotel footage came into evidence. Ms. Ventura testified, so now Ms. Richard is here testifying to more allegations of domestic violence. And the government has to be really careful here, because the way that it is being painted at this point is that this is a domestically violent case, which is true. But the government needs to prove a RICO. They need to prove sex trafficking. They don't need to prove domestic violence, and it can certainly confuse the issues with the jury and ultimately land them in a verdict of not guilty.
I know some of the evidence that the government will point to, some of frequent flyer accounts, credit cards, bank accounts. We haven't really heard a lot about that as of yet. How do you see the government, now that they've really established, whether it's Cassie's testimony, some things that Dawn Richard has said about the domestic abuse, the violence that was in this relationship, where do they go from here if they are going to paint this picture of a RICO, which is essentially what they need to do in this trial if they want to get a conviction?
Yeah, so what the government's going to continue to do is put on their witnesses. I think that they got a witness on the stand that worked for Mr. Combs at a certain point in time. That individual also testified to some alleged violent behavior on behalf of Mr. Combs. I think if this individual is still testifying, or as other individuals continue to testify, we will start to hear about transportation with regard to these alleged sex workers. So one of the things that the government has to prove and show is that there was a transportation via interstate commerce, which is a very wide net and catch-all for the government in order to seek a conviction, is that these...
In reality, to understand that charm and intimidation can coexist, that generosity and control can sit in the same room. The past didn't disappear, it just waited. It waited for the moment when someone felt safe enough to say, "That scared me," not in a dramatic way, in a human way. And that's powerful, because fear doesn't need embellishment to be real. It doesn't need exaggeration. When someone calmly says they were frightened, people listen differently. The chilling part isn't what's being said, it's what isn't. The gaps, the pauses, the restraint, the sense that not everything is being shared, only what feels necessary. Those gaps invite reflection. They make people wonder how many others felt the same way but never spoke. How many stories are still buried because the cost of unearthing them feels too high? The resurfacing also reveals how well the system worked, how effectively it protected itself, how loyalty was rewarded and discomfort was minimized, how success stories drowned out quiet warnings. For years, the narrative was untouchable. It was polished, celebrated.
Individuals were transported or traveled via interstate commerce from one state to another. So we may hear testimony about frequent flyer accounts, or whoever the individual was that set up these or purchased these plane tickets, or if they flew private, whoever set up the transportation and travel may ultimately testify. We might hear from them to further establish that this was a sex trafficking case.
And on the interstate commerce charge. If they were to buy an escort from Miami and fly them to New York, would that be considered interstate commerce?
That would be. So the train, or excuse me, not the train, the plane traveling from Miami to New York is an indication that this was via interstate commerce because it's going from one state to another. Even if they traveled via train or via car, going across state lines would satisfy that factor.
We've seen Cassie's off the stand, but whether it's Don Richard's testimony, David James, who's the former personal assistant, he's talked about Cassie as well. What do you make at this point, seeing how the testimony's going, that the government decided to have Cassie early on in this trial as opposed to building up to her testimony at the end?
You know, I'm always in favor, as a former prosecutor, I'm always in favor of putting my victim on last if I can, because her words will echo to the jury indefinitely. You know, yes, she could have testified early and people will tend to remember what they've heard early on and later in the game. But I think here it's really impactful to build up the puzzle, these other individuals who were involved, and ultimately get us to Miss Ventura, who, you know, will testify as to what specifically happened. And the jury is going to be more likely to remember her testimony, especially compelling testimony, if she is the last and key witness. And there would have been a buildup that the government would have made to her testimony. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't come back guilty because she did testify early on, and now these individuals that are testifying are further establishing what happened. That's just a personal preference and what the government ultimately deemed as the best way to, you know, put their witnesses on. And also, Miss Ventura is pregnant, heavily pregnant. They didn't want to run the risk of her going into labor later on during the trial and not being able to be present to testify. So I think that they did have to get her out of the way early. My preference just would have been to put her on later if I was the prosecutor on the case.
We've seen a couple cross-examinations from Sean Combs' defense team. How would you say they're doing thus far?
I think they're doing a great job. I think that the defense is eliciting facts or alleged facts that the prosecution has kept out so far. And one of the things that we always discuss, you know, in trial practice is you never want the jury to find something out from the other side. If you have bad facts for your case, you want to get them out there and do away with it and show them it's not a big deal. Yes, she may not have disclosed certain information previously, and I can explain later as to why, but you really want to get those bad facts out of the way. And I think that at least some of the testimony that I've seen or heard is that, you know, when these when the prosecution witnesses are testifying under cross-examination, the defense is getting out facts that really kind of hurt the prosecution. I think that with Ms. Richard's testimony, she testified that, you know, she had been working with Mr. Combs, that she observed these allegations of violence and things of that nature. But then later down the line, she goes to work for him and works in a musical group with him and another individual. We didn't hear that under the direct examination. We heard that under cross-examination. And I think that those are the things that the government needs to be mindful.
Defended. Anyone who questioned it was dismissed as bitter or jealous. But narratives don't hold forever when reality starts leaking through. The fear being described wasn't sudden. It was cumulative, built over time, layer by layer, each strange interaction adding weight, each unsettling moment reinforcing the feeling that something wasn't right. That kind of fear changes you. It teaches you to stay alert, to watch instead of relax, to measure every word. It follows you even after you leave the environment behind. That's why these stories matter now, not because they destroy a legacy overnight, but because they complicate it. They introduce discomfort where certainty once lived. The chilling effect comes from recognition, from listeners realizing they've felt similar things in different places, different industries, different power structures, same imbalance. The past resurfacing isn't about rewriting history, it's about filling in the parts that were deliberately left blank, the parts that didn't fit the narrative of greatness. The stories being shared now aren't dramatic, they're restrained. They focus on how situations felt rather than what they looked like, on how certain moments lingered long after they were.
She had traveled with was stolen. The only money plaintiff had remaining was a $20 bill. Plaintiff was admitted to the St. Vincent's Hospital, treated, and released. And she explains that when she was released, she was a tourist. She had never been to New York City before. There were no smartphones, so she really couldn't figure out how to get back to her hotel. She claimed she had to hail a taxi and use the only money she had left, the $20 bill, to get her back. The complaint goes on. When plaintiff returned to her hotel, she called a friend and explained she was not sure what happened to her, but plaintiff believed she was drugged, assaulted, robbed, with no memory of how she arrived at the hospital, as her last memory was being at Diddy's black party. And then she claims she ends up flying back home. But then, this is where things take yet another turn. The complaint reads, the day after plaintiff returned home from New York, she received a call from a New York area code with an anonymous female caller. The anonymous female caller asked to speak to plaintiff. The anonymous female caller then threatened plaintiff, telling her that any attempts to pursue anything about plaintiff's assault would be futile because defendant Combs was a celebrity and that plaintiff would just be wasting her time. Plaintiff was confused and scared as she did not know what happened to her. Plaintiff hearing from this anonymous female caller was further jarring and traumatizing as plaintiff learned that not only was she viciously assaulted, leading to her waking up at the hospital, but that defendant Combs was involved and plaintiff would be unable to seek justice for her injuries because of defendant Combs' celebrity status. And then it goes on to say for approximately a week after she had returned home, she felt this constant pain in her private area, and it's pain that she believed was from rough sexual intercourse. But again, she says she has no memory of engaging in intercourse with anyone. The complaint goes on to say, plaintiff did not seek medical treatment or otherwise report her assault to law enforcement because she was scared and confused. First, because she did not know exactly what happened to her. Second, because of the threat she received from the anonymous female caller of defendant Combs' involvement, and it being a waste of time due to his celebrity status. And then she goes on to explain how as a result of what happened to her, she suffered from depression, anxiety, she has felt shame, she felt betrayed by all those who facilitated her attending this party, and as a result, she says, she hasn't been able to keep a job or be a productive member of society, that she's experienced intimacy issues. This is a harm component that's important in these kinds of lawsuits. What did you suffer? It's important for a damages analysis. And she says the reason that she filed this lawsuit now, so many years later, is because Sean Combs is currently locked up in the Metropolitan Detention Center with no bond, that she finally feels safe to come forward. Okay, before we move forward, I have a few thoughts on this. First of all, from a legal point of view, the weaknesses in this case, in this claim, are that she doesn't remember anything. That includes not only the alleged assault or what exactly happened to her, but even her meeting or having any interaction with Sean Combs. She is basing this off what someone else allegedly told her. Her hospital visit, the pain she felt, yes, that's important. But can you tie it back to Sean Combs? There is clearly, evidence based on her account. Her hospital visit, the pain she felt, you could say that is evidence of sexual assault for sure. But again, can she prove that it was directly tied back to Combs, that he did this? And look, of course,
over on how silence became a habit, not because nothing happened, but because speaking felt impossible. There's something deeply disturbing about realizing that fear was present all along, quietly shaping behavior, teaching people when to speak and when to stay quiet, teaching them to laugh at things that made them uncomfortable, teaching them to ignore instincts in exchange for opportunity. At the time, everything moved fast. There was no room to slow down and process what was happening. You were expected to adapt, to be grateful, to keep going. Any hesitation felt like weakness. Any discomfort felt like something you had to overcome on your own. No one is asking for sympathy. No one is demanding punishment. The act itself is simple, telling the truth as it was experienced, naming fear for what it was. That act alone disrupts everything. Because once fear is acknowledged, it can't be unseen. Once someone says they were scared, the room changes, the past changes, the story changes. The chilling part is realizing how many people knew, felt, sensed something, but stayed quiet because silence was safer, because silence kept doors open, because silence kept careers alive. Now, silence is breaking, not explosively, but steadily, and each quiet admission adds weight to the resurfacing past. This isn't the end of anything, it's the beginning of reevaluation, of listening more carefully, of understanding that power without accountability breeds fear, even when it smiles. The past is no longer sealed, it's breathing again, not loudly, not aggressively, just enough to remind everyone that success doesn't erase impact, and time doesn't erase truth. And once those frightening stories are out there, even in fragments, the chill remains, not because of what might come next, but because of what already happened, unseen, unchallenged, and now impossible to ignore.